Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
President Lee Jae Myung has embarked on a 10-day four-nation trip to the Middle East and Africa as part of his latest efforts to deepen Korea's diplomatic relations in the global south. Leading firms here have announced they will pour tens of billions of dollars into building local factories, advanced technology, and providing new jobs. A move designed to spur domestic investment, even after Seoul's multi-billion-dollar investment in Washington. South Korea's defense ministry proposed military talks with North Korea on Monday to discuss how to clarify the military demarcation line in a bid to prevent possible clashes near the inter-Korean border. The first stop of the South Korean president's 10-day four-nation trip is the UAE, where Seoul and Abu Dhabi will seek to solidify the two sides' collaboration from defense and nuclear power to AI. Our Presidential Office correspondent Song Yujin leads us tonight.
President Lee Jae Myung begins his four-nation trip in the United Arab Emirates, South Korea's only special strategic partner in the Middle East.
Through this visit, President Lee's first to the Middle East since taking office. We plan to expand cooperation beyond the four key areas of investment: defense, nuclear power, and energy, into advanced technology, healthcare, and culture.
After arriving in Abu Dhabi on Monday afternoon, the president will visit the National Memorial and the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque, where the country's founding president is laid to rest. He will end day one with a meeting with members of the local Korean community. On Tuesday, he will hold a summit with UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, followed by an MOU signing ceremony and lunch. The MOUs will cover areas including artificial intelligence, business cooperation, and defense. Eyes are on the scale of the defense deal between the two countries. Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Won-sik, currently visiting the Middle East as a special envoy for strategic economic cooperation, wrote on social media on Sunday that he delivered President Lee's personal letter to the UAE president, expressing Seoul's hope of elevating bilateral cooperation to a new level. Kang added that the president's visit aims to secure, quote, tangible results in AI, defense, energy, and logistics. On Wednesday, Lee will attend the South Korea-UAE Business Roundtable and meet Korean special forces stationed in the country. The president's next stop is Egypt, where he will hold talks with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and deliver a lecture at Cairo University on the administration's Middle East strategy. He will then travel to South Africa to attend the G20 Leaders Summit in Johannesburg, the latest in a series of major multilateral forums he has joined this year, including the G7 Summit, the UN General Assembly, the ASEAN Summit, and the APEC Leaders Meeting.
President Lee will underscore South Korea's commitment to solidarity and cooperation, not only with South Africa, but with Africa as a whole, and express our willingness to contribute to the continent's development.
President Lee's final stop will be a state visit to Turkey. There, he will meet President Recep Tayyip Erdogan to strengthen the strategic partnership in defense, nuclear energy, and cutting-edge industries. South Korea's presidential jet will return home next Wednesday. Song Yujin, Arirang News.
As South Korea's biggest corporate players prepare to invest billions into the U.S., a crucial part of concluding bilateral tariff negotiations, those companies have unveiled a multi-billion-dollar plan to create new factories and jobs here at home. Our Oh Soo-young has this report.
South Korea's largest conglomerates are pledging tens of billions of dollars for domestic factories, advanced technology and new jobs, as concerns rise that expanding US operations could draw capital away from home. Samsung on Sunday unveiled an investment plan worth 450 trillion won, which is around $310 billion over 5 years for semiconductors, AI computing, displays and advanced batteries. It will also hire 60,000 people domestically and expand support programs for small and mid-sized suppliers across more than 1,000 partner companies. Hyundai Motor Group announced its largest ever domestic plan, committing 125.2 trillion won, or around $86.5 billion, through 2030. This includes roughly $17.2 billion a year for AI, robotics, EVs and hydrogen systems. The group will increase hiring to 10,000 recruits next year. These announcements came as President Lee Jae Myung met the heads of Korea's major industrial groups at the Yongsan Presidential Office on Sunday. The 2-hour session took place after the release of the Korea-U.S. joint fact sheet, which summarized the outcome of the recent tariff and security talks, including Seoul's large-scale investment into American industries. South Korea's private sector, including Samsung, SK, Hyundai and LG, is expected to pitch in $150 billion. President Lee thanked executives for their role during the negotiations. However, he asked them to ensure that domestic investment and regional projects do not fall behind as US operations expand, emphasizing the importance of local employment and balanced growth alongside SMEs. While Samsung and Hyundai set the tone with the most consequential announcements, other conglomerates followed with large-scale domestic commitments. SK Group is expanding its investment beyond $88.3 billion, while LG Group plans $69 billion, focused on key materials and parts. Hanwha will spend $7.6 billion on domestic shipbuilding and defense, and HD Hyundai will invest $10.3 billion across energy and marine technologies. Celltrion will double its bioventure fund to $690 million. President Lee emphasized that enabling companies to act freely and creatively on the global stage is one of the government's core responsibilities. He pledged to review a range of support measures, including deregulation going forward. 오수영, Arirang News.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said that a rare earths deal between the U.S. and China will probably be agreed to by November. Bessent added that next year will be a great year for working Americans and the markets under President Donald Trump's signature plan. Cha Young reports.
Almost a month after the meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea, the Wall Street Journal reported that Chinese officials are likely to restrict access to rare earths for U.S. companies with ties to the American military. However, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent disputed the report, saying that it was not accurate and irresponsible. Bessent said a rare earths deal between the U.S. and China will hopefully be done by November, during the remarks airing on Sunday.
I think that Wall Street Journal reporting is not very accurate. We haven't even finished the agreement, which we hope to have done by Thanksgiving, that China will honor their agreement.
Bessent added that he has lots of levers if China does not honor the agreement. His comments follow a framework agreement announced last month in which Washington agreed not to impose 100% tariffs on Chinese imports. Bessent said that the U.S. will see a substantial acceleration in the economy in the second quarters next year. Also, tariff rebate checks are planned to be issued to most Americans, which would require Congress approval.
We're bending that curve down, and the increase in real incomes, I think Americans are going to feel it in the first quarter, second quarter.
Regarding President Trump's tariffs on global imports, Scott Bessent said he was confident the Supreme Court would not strike them down, since refunding importers for tariffs already paid would be complicated. Cha Young, Arirang News.
South Korea is calling for higher-level military talks with North Korea as the tensions rise along the demilitarized zone after repeated border incursions, with Seoul seeking to clarify the official boundary and prevent accidental clashes. Moon Hye-ryun has the details.
South Korea has formally proposed holding inter-Korean military talks to ease rising tensions in the demilitarized zone after repeated incursions by North Korean troops across the military demarcation line. According to a statement from the South Korean Defense Ministry on Monday, North Korean personnel have been laying mines and building tactical roads near the MDL, sometimes crossing into South Korean territory. In response, the South Korean military has carried out warning broadcasts and warning shots to ensure the North withdraws, following established operational procedures. The ministry says these repeated incursions have heightened tensions in the DMZ, raising concerns that they could trigger an unintended military clash. Officials attribute the problem in part to the loss of many MDL markers installed after the armistice agreement in 1953. Around 1,300 markers were installed when the agreement was signed, but now only 200 remain clearly identifiable. Previous efforts to maintain these markers, including repairs supervised by the UN in 1973, were halted after North Korean gunfire, and current maps now rely on coordinates verified with the U.S. National Geospatial Intelligence Agency.
Our military formally proposes holding inter-Korean military talks to prevent accidental clashes between the two sides and to ease military tensions, with the aim of discussing the establishment of a baseline for the MDL.
The presidential office also confirmed this statement, saying that many MDL markers have been lost and a proposal for talks has been made. Experts say this proposal underscores the urgent need to ease DMZ tensions and is a part of a broader effort to normalize military coordination and reduce miscalculation risks, as the first official dialogue offered by the Lee Jae Myung administration. The talks would be coordinated through the Joint Security Area in Panmunjom, though a specific schedule and venues are yet to be agreed. Since 2000, inter-Korean military talks have included 2 defense minister-level meetings, 10 general-level meetings, and 40 working-level meetings. But no high-level meetings have been held for more than 7 years since the 10th general-level meeting in October 2018. Officials emphasize that the absence of recent high-level discussions has left the MDL more vulnerable to misinterpretation. South Korea is calling for a swift response, saying the talks would help reduce tensions across the peninsula and improve mutual understanding of the border. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Also Monday, the U.S. top military commander here in South Korea has highlighted the crucial role that Seoul can play to ensure regional stability by simply shifting the perspective on the map. Our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung explains.
Presenting an East-Up map, U.S. Forces Korea Commander General Xavier Bronson explained hidden strategic advantages of the Indo-Pacific and the critical role South Korea can play in the region, underlining the strategic triangle it can make with Japan and the Philippines. Pointing out how traditional maps with a standard north-up projection can obscure the region's strategic importance, the general said in an article on the USFK website that troops positioned inside the bubble perimeter can play a significant role in the event of a contingency. With the map shifted with east orientation toward the top, the map clearly shows the strategic value of what South Korea can do. The peninsula can impose cost on Russia, not allowing its fleet to come into waters east of Korea, while imposing cost on China in the waters off its west coast. More significantly, a strategic triangle can be seen connecting Korea, Japan, and the Philippines. Each mutual defense partner with the U.S. could be viewed as one of the 3 verticals of a triangle, making the collective potential easier to see. By country, he mentioned how the 3 countries are each equipped with unique capabilities: Korea's central depth, Japan's technological advantage and maritime reach, and the Philippines' access to key southern sea lanes. In a separate note to reporters, the general added that this strategic triangle is not about forming a new alliance, but rather about recognizing geographic relationships that already exist and finding practical ways to coordinate. General Bronson's such views come at a time when the role and scale of the 28,500 USFK troops could be adjusted as the U.S. seeks to modernize the alliance. While highlighting the hidden geometry of alliance cooperation in the Indo-Pacific with the East-Up map, the USFK chief further recommended allies and partners to also incorporate these alternative perspectives to build a shared understanding of geographic relationships. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
A new parliamentary report predicts South Korea's manufacturing sector will slow down, while its services sector will see growth next year. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has the details.
The nation's manufacturing sector is expected to suffer as its growth is being stymied by U.S. tariffs. According to a midterm economic outlook by the National Assembly Budget Office on Monday, real value added growth for manufacturing is projected at 1.5% next year. This is a 0.3 percentage point decline from this year's 1.8%. Also, its outlook is showing a declining trend throughout 2026, with the first half reaching 1.6% and the latter half 1.4%. The report attributes the slowdown to the escalating impact of U.S. tariff policies and a delayed recovery in domestic construction. The outlook for key industries is also uncertain. With semiconductors, there are concerns of a price drop amid heightened competition from Chinese suppliers. Meanwhile, the automotive industry also faces headwinds from slowing global demand.
Unless we develop a truly groundbreaking product, one with significant exclusive power, or unless such an innovative product emerges, if we continue to compete with the products we currently have, it seems to be a natural trend, in some respects, that the value-added rate will continue to fall.
Meanwhile, the services sector's real value-added growth is estimated to rise to 2.0% next year, an increase of 0.6 percentage points from this year's 1.4%. This forecast is half a percentage point higher than that for the manufacturing sector. Key upward factors include rising healthcare demand from an aging population and growth in the transport sector, supported by stable oil prices and increased domestic foreign travel. This trend is expected to become structural. National Assembly Budget Office projects services sector growth to hold at around 2.0% through 2029, while manufacturing is forecast to settle in the 1.7% range after 2027. Experts note that as manufacturing bases shift to the U.S., domestic facility investment will weaken. A researcher from the Korea Economic and Industrial Research Institute stressed the need for policy designed to attract foreign corporate facilities and induce foreign capital into South Korea. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
With the deadline to pass South Korea's 2026 fiscal budget just 2 weeks away, lawmakers have entered the final and most contentious phase of deliberations. The National Assembly's Budget Subcommittee began reviewing spending plans from 20 ministries on Monday to decide which programs should face cuts or increases. A key flashpoints between the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party include the President's Office's Special Activity Funds, the National Growth Fund for Advanced Industries, and a Rural Basic Income Program. Once the subcommittee completes its draft, it'll move to a full review and then a plenary vote before the December 2nd deadline. The U.S. military continues its series of strikes against a vessel suspected of transporting drugs. And its USS Gerald R carrier strike group has now reached the Caribbean Sea, as the Trump administration also continues to increase pressure on the Venezuelan leader to halt drug operations. Yoon Jin reports.
The world's largest and most expensive aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, arrived in the Caribbean on Sunday. The Maritime Forces operations in the U.S. Southern Command, or SOUTHCOM area of responsibility, come to support President Donald Trump's directive to dismantle transnational criminal organizations and counter narco-terrorism to stop the flow of drugs into the U.S. The Ford rounds off the largest buildup of U.S. firepower in the region in generations. And with its 4,000 sailors and dozens of military aircraft aboard the lead ship, the Operation Southern Spear mission now includes nearly a dozen Navy ships and about 12,000 sailors and Marines. This continues the Trump administration's buildup of American forces in the region. The Ford's arrival coincided with the U.S. military's announcement of its latest deadly strike on Saturday, killing 3 men on a small boat it claims was ferrying illegal drugs. Since early September, such strikes by the U.S. in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific have killed at least 83 people in 21 attacks. However, critics have pointed out that the Trump administration has not released any evidence to support its assertions that those killed in the boats were narco-terrorists. The latest move is also seen as the Trump administration increasing pressure on Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, who was charged by U.S. prosecutors in 2020 with narco-terrorism. Trump said on Sunday that some discussions with Venezuela were a possibility, without providing further detail nor specifically mentioning Maduro. The U.S. has long used aircraft carriers to pressure and deter aggression. Some experts say that while the Ford is ill-suited to fighting cartels, it could be an effective method of intimidation against Maduro. 이은진, Arirang News.
Time now to take a look at what's been happening in the world of sports. Joining us for that is our sports editor, Paul Neitz, here in this studio. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you. Hello.
Why don't we start with baseball? After the two-game win over the Czech Republic, South Korean team was able to salvage a tie against Japan, right?
That's right, yes. They were in Tokyo for a two-game friendly series with Japan. They lost the first game 11-4, which was seen as a result of unstable pitching, unable to preserve an early 3-0 lead. But the second game, played on Sunday, ended 7-7 with something of a late rally. With a home run from An Hyun-min in the 8th inning to make it 7-6, there was hope of a comeback. Then, with South Korea down to its final out in the bottom of the 9th, Kim Ju-won hit a solo home run to level the score. Now, although the tie will be seen as a relief, Korea R had again had to deal with some issues in the pitching department, with relievers unable to preserve the lead. Korea were able to out-hit Japan, though, 9-6. The team are in Pool C for the World Baseball Classic next March, along with Australia, Chinese Taipei, Japan and the Czech Republic.
I see. Now to speed skating. I understand a new national record has been set in the 500 meters. Tell us more.
Right, set by Kim Jun-ho at the ISU Speed Skating World Cup in Utah. On Sunday, local time at the Utah Olympic Oval in Salt Lake City, Kim Jun-ho finished third in the 500 meters to win bronze. His time of 33.78 seconds is a new national record, breaking Cha Min-gyu's record set in March 2019 by 0.25 of a second. Kim also had the fastest splits in the opening 100 meters of 9.49 seconds. Meanwhile, another bronze was won by South Korea, with Lee Na-hyun winning the women's 500 meters. Also, on Sunday, it was her first World Cup individual medal, and the time of 37.03 seconds is a personal best.
Good for her. Well, staying with that women's 500 meters, the winner apparently broke a record once held by a South Korean star, right?
Right, yeah, a record that had been intact for 12 years. Femke Kok of the Netherlands finished first to win gold. She set the world record with a time of 36.09 seconds, breaking a 12-year-old record held by two-time Olympic champion Lee Hanwha. 36.36 seconds set by Lee Hanwha was also done at the Olympic Oval in Utah back in November 2013. And the new record is 0.27 seconds faster. But Lee Hanwha's record was the longest standing in an official Olympic skating event.
Feels like just yesterday she, set that score. Now, finally to football, the very last match for the South Korea's men's national football game is set tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yes, that's right, against Ghana in Seoul. It's the second of two matches this month. The first was a 2-0 win over Bolivia on Friday in Daejeon. Son Heung-min sent in a fine free kick just shy of the hour mark. It was a very similar goal and location to the one he scored on his 100th cap back in June 2022. But then, making it 2-0, Cho Gu-song came off the bench to bundle the ball home late on. It was his first appearance since March 2024 and first goal since January that year. He'd been out injured for nearly 2 years. The match was also Lee Jae-sung's 100th for South Korea.
Fingers crossed for Team Korea tomorrow. Thanks for that, Paul.
Thank you.
The winter cold has arrived suddenly. The cold air came down from the north overnight, and the wind chill in Seoul brought temperatures down to around 0 degrees Celsius. Cold weather advisories have been issued in some parts of Gangwon-do Province, Chungcheongbuk-do Province, Gyeongsang-buk-do Province, and Busan. It will get even colder tomorrow. The first sub-zero cold of this fall is expected in Seoul. Freezing cold of -3 degrees will appear, and it will feel like -7 degrees in the morning. Please dress extra warm. Tomorrow morning, Daejeon will start off at -2 degrees, Chuncheon at -5 degrees. Daily highs will rise up to single digits in most areas, while Seoul at 6 degrees, Chuncheon, Daejeon, Daegu, and Gyeongju at 7 degrees. The first snow of this fall is expected on the west coast in this cold tomorrow. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
혼자라는 게 때론 지울 수 없는 낙인 같아 살아가는 게 나를 죄인으로 만드네. 꽃이 된 사람, 꽃이 된 사람, 사랑하다가 나도 꽃이 되었네.
Knock, knock. The magical door to the world of K-animation is swinging wide open. Meet your instant new BFF, the adorable Catch. Tina Ping will have you hooked from the very first glance. Need a hand? Our Robocar Poli Rescue team is always zooming in to save the day. How about tagging along on Ping Fong and Pal's super exciting quest to reclaim their lost magic? With the mysterious life forms Cabion by your side, you can become a Cabion master and save humanity like the total hero. Protecting children's innocence while igniting their boundless imaginations. That's the magic of Korean animation. K-animation, the ultimate bestie for kids worldwide.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. Last week, South Korea and the United States released a joint fact sheet detailing breakthroughs in security, defense, and trade. South Korean President Lee Jae Myung called it a renaissance in bilateral ties, while Washington framed it as a historic strategic shift. Nuclear-powered submarines, boosted defense spending, and key trade wins like semiconductor protections are just the beginning. Following this, President Lee today launched a diplomatic tour of Africa and the Middle East, expanding South Korea's outreach beyond the U.S.-China sphere. To help us break down what all this means, we connect to Pan Gil-ju, assistant professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. A big welcome.
Hello, good to be with you.
And also joining us is Daniel Connolly, associate professor of international relations at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good to see you.
Great to be here.
So, Professor Bond, let's first begin with the release of the fact sheet. President Lee Jae Myung called the results as the opening of a new renaissance in the South Korea-U.S. alliance, while U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Orlando hailed it as a historic agreement that opens a new chapter in the alliance. How do you assess the overall impact of this agreement on the direction and role of the alliance moving forward?
Well, to put it simply, this joint fact sheet is better placed to make the ROK-US alliance more symmetric, although there are still follow-up measures ahead. Before going for a deep dive on the joint fact sheet, we need to take a snapshot of the security environment around the world. The previously working formula is dysfunctional, as we can see in the loosening rules-based order. In the meantime, the alliance formula is on a different track as well, particularly in a situation where the Trump administration attempts to include a very real-looking variable, which is a deal even in alliances. So the concept of alliance modernization serves as a typical example of the changing status in the alliance formula. When those factors are taken into consideration, alliance risks are on the rise around the world. With this in mind, the joint fact sheet shows that alliance risks have been addressed, at least for the time being, in the ROK-US alliance. First, the joint fact sheet shows that South Korea will put more effort into enhancing its capability to defend itself, but at the same time, USFK, US Forces Korea, will continue to define deterring North Korea as its primary mission. Second, both sides agreed to maintain the 2006 strategic flexibility, which means the USFK will not be dispatched for missions off the Korean Peninsula without consultation with South Korea. Third, South Korea and the United States clarified the win-win items, such as cooperation in shipbuilding and nuclear power. In particular, new items that have have never been made before appeared in the joint fact sheet, which includes nuclear power submarines as well as uranium enrichment and spent fuel reprocessing, obviously related to 123 agreement. This last item contributes to making the alliance architecture more symmetric than before. All in all, I would say that the joint fact sheet not only helps address alliance risks, but also serve as a stepping stone for the ROK-US alliance to evolve into a symmetric alliance. In the meantime, alliance management should continue to go on in the sense that Trump's negotiation formula is repetitive and endless, and the United States national security strategy has not been laid out yet.
Right. So, Professor Bond, thank you for the overall picture of the latest deal. Of the many outcomes that you've mentioned, let's point out on the key outcome, which was the U.S. approval for South Korea to build nuclear-powered submarines. So, strategically and politically, Professor Connolly, what does this approval actually mean for South Korea?
Well, I think it's highly significant because only 6 countries currently operate nuclear submarines. Australia is on a kind of a long-term pathway to getting them, and now South Korea. So definitely in terms of status in the international system, it's a huge deal. But I do think some of the long-term consequences might be a little more mixed than some of the more exuberant supporters of the plan believe. And I would like to identify 3 issues in particular, looking long-term. First, these submarines are not as useful against North Korea as sometimes people talk about them. You don't need nuclear submarines to deal with North Korea's Navy, which is essentially a brown water Navy with small patrol vessels. Really, you just need more anti-submarine capability. I think nuclear submarines represent a global force projection capabilities that are much more useful for projecting South Korean sovereignty in the world oceans. And this, of course, does alarm Russia, does alarm China, and it does raise kind of dangerous questions about South Korean foreign policy in the future, because once you have a capability, then there's a greater chance the U.S. is going to ask you to use it in a context that you may not want to. And I think this was really exemplified by the U.S. Chief of Naval Operations, who recently visited Korea and said, and this is a quote, "Utilization of that submarine to counter China, I think, is a natural expectation." So the U.S. side may ask Korea to use this in ways that the South Korean officials may not want to. Second, I think the problem of fuel. The Chinese use low-enriched uranium in their submarines. The U.S. and the Australian submarines currently being developed use highly enriched uranium, which is a very kind of a stepping stone to nuclear weapons. I think for the case of the South Korean submarines, which type of reactors are they going to use? If they use a U.S. design with highly enriched uranium, that's going to call into question some of South Korea's anti-proliferation credentials. And lastly, we have to think about the broader changes to the future of war going on right now. If you look at the war in Ukraine, cheap disposable maritime drones are proving to be very successful at destroying expensive warships. A lot of innovation in cheap digital sensors that you can basically scatter over the ocean. So I think in narrow waters like the East Sea and the West Sea, a nuclear submarine may be very vulnerable. So again, this is something that's not going to be used in a North Korean contingency. And ultimately, I worry South Korea might be like a country building battleships in 1939 on the eve of Pearl Harbor, when a cheaper weapon rendered this expensive device obsolete. So militarily, I do have some questions about the long-term practicability. Politically, though, it's a huge coup for the South Korean government.
Right. So behind this very big decision, there seems to be some underlying concerns and also uncertainties as well. And aside from what Professor Connolly mentioned, there are other concerns about the fact sheet omitting crucial details on whether the submarines will be built and where the submarines will be built and how the nuclear fuel will be supplied, actually. So the Korean government has long pushed for domestic construction. We are aware of that. Professor Ban, what's the outlook for follow-up negotiations on these missing elements?
To be honest with you, details on the nuclear power submarine program had better not be included in the joint fact sheet because it takes more than 10 years to be accomplished, which means uncertainty remains in the future process. Too many details could lead to friction between the two in the process later on. Since the two sides agreed on the basic policy of South Korea's nuclear power submarines, I believe that the joint task force will work anytime soon in order to tackle the detailed items. I believe that follow-up negotiations should consider the two key variables. First, taking advantage of South Korea's world-class shipbuilding capability, and second, leading this program to create synergy for the MASGA project. In this regard, the main construction should be made in South Korea because this way is advantageous for both cost effectiveness and the time to be fielded. Meanwhile, the scenario that the final process for submarine construction will be made in the United States could be under review as one of the possible options, which include lowering nuclear fuel in submarine platforms as part of an effort to make the MASGA philosophy viable. Furthermore, constructing the third and fourth submarines in the United States could be included as one of the options under the condition that South Korea will proactively join the program to build AUKUS submarines. This option is expected to not only enhance the MASGA project, but also expand K shipbuilding to the world.
Exactly. So the missing details are as important, and they could actually determine how fast or how far this actually would pursue. Now, taking it a little bit further, Professor Connolly, like you've mentioned, the fact sheet also opened the door for cooperation on uranium enrichment and spent fuel reprocessing. Though you've mentioned some concerns a while ago, what do you think is the significance of this latest development? And also, realistically, what hurdles are still remaining?
Right. Well, I think South Korea's ambition to have an independent fuel cycle is arguably as important, if not more so, than the nuclear submarine ambition. And if you recall, in the lead up to APEC, President Lee first asked for permission to engage in uranium enrichment for the purposes of building nuclear submarines, and then Trump kind of said you can build nuclear submarines. I think because an independent fuel cycle really helps the competitiveness of South Korea's civil nuclear industry. So this has not only a high amount of status, but also export markets and economic potential, whereas sinking a bunch of money into expensive nuclear submarines is not as much of an economic benefit as a civilian nuclear industry. I do think there's some problems, though, because South Korea's nuclear industry is very competitive. The United States is also trying to export reactors. There's an era of hunger for electricity with AI. So I think South Korea's mastery of a fuel cycle will give it an advantage in exports, especially to the Middle East and Europe. But the United States, I think, envisions a much more of a traditional relationship where South Korea is gradually expanding its independent fuel cycle, but not as a competitor to the United States. And I find it's quite interesting that there is a recent U.S. fact sheet on the bilateral 123 agreement was uploaded on the State Department's website earlier this year. And it even has a little kind of a paragraph talking about how they imagine a situation where the U.S. provides the fuel to South Korea continues to provide reactor components. They see it much more of this kind of symbiotic relationship rather than South Korea being a fully independent nuclear power. So I think even in the US, there's a lot of debates amongst the different departments, the different policymakers on how quickly they want South Korea to progress in this civil uranium enrichment. And the fact sheet is quite vague about the timing and how quickly this will happen.
Right, definitely. So it will be very important to watch how the two countries would sort out the differences in terms of perspectives and interests as well. Now, let's switch gears a little bit to defense modernization as well. So the fact sheet also outlines substantial upgrades in military cooperation. Professor Bon, South Korea is committed to raising its defense spending to 3.5% of GDP, and Washington expressed support for transferring wartime OPCON. How would you evaluate these defense and security-related agreements?
Well, the issue of modernizing Iraq-U.S. alliance shows how negotiations work when dealing with the Trump administration. In general, many items are included in the alliance modernization, ranging from the size of USFK to strategic flexibility and special measures agreement. However, those items have not been raised this time seriously when it comes to the alliance modernization. So the question is, what is the reason behind? I would say that South Korea's proactive intention to increase its defense spending to 3.5% of its GDP helped prevent other items on the alliance modernization from being raised on the table. As the United States demands alliance modernization, South Korea raises the future-oriented comprehensive strategic alliance. Those two look similar, but there are some differences as well. South Korea is eager to enhance the scope of its authority in the combined defense architecture. The transition of wartime operational control contributes to enhancing the level of its authority. Meanwhile, the OPCON transition should lead to enhanced defense readiness, not weakened one. To that end, a conditions-based OPCON transition plan should continue to work. Both sides promise to pay more attention to OPCON transition, but at the same time, they reconfirm the condition-based plan. In this vein, I would say that the agreement on the OPCON transition helps reduce the differences in alliance perspective between South Korea and the United States.
That will be a great scenario that we're going to look forward to. Now, meanwhile, switching gears again, starting today, President Lee is embarking on a diplomatic tour to 4 nations in Africa and the Middle East. Professor Conley, how do you interpret this move as part of South Korea's strategy to kind of diversify beyond its traditional partner-focused foreign policy?
Oh, absolutely. I think in this world where Trump and I would say future U.S. presidents are probably going to continue to act much more arbitrary than they have in the past, it's very important for middle powers like South Korea to diversify away from too much of a reliance on the U.S. market, maybe even too much reliance on the U.S. kind of diplomatic apparatus. So if South Korea succeeds in demonstrating its leadership independently of the United States, it's going to open up a lot of deals and a lot of trade opportunities. And if you think about South Korea right now, it's kind of embracing a closer relationship with the United States and elevating itself, as Professor Ban just said, more authority in the context of the U.S. alliance system. But I think South Korea needs to balance this elevation vis-a-vis the United States and Japan in their military alliance with the perceptions of the rest of the world, and especially developing countries, non-aligned countries. South Korea doesn't want to look too much like a U.S. I don't want to use the word puppet. North Korea always says that. But still, I think South Korea needs to show that it is willing to do multilateral diplomacy. It's willing to be a reliable trading partner, even in a world where the hegemons are increasingly unpredictable and unreliable.
Right. It's indeed a bold pivot, especially at a time when global alignments are getting even more complex lately. Now, on the cultural front, the presidential office said that during President Lee's trip, it aims to position major Middle Eastern countries as hubs for K-culture, expanding cultural exchanges as well. Beyond economics and security, what is the strategic value of cultural diplomacy, and how much real impact can it actually generate? Professor Ban?
Well, K-diplomacy has been strongly supported by the 2 assets. First one, global Korean companies, and second one is K-culture or Korean wave. Meanwhile, the current ROK government seeks diplomatic expansion as shown by policies like global responsible power diplomacy and G7 plus diplomacy. In this sense, the current ROK government is more motivated to take advantage of K-culture, which has already been embedded around the world. Likewise, South Korea suggested CCI's cultural and creative industries and included them in the Gyeongju Declaration at the end of the APEC summit. I believe that K-culture, which is embedded around the world, motivated South Korea to proactively suggest this item. How helpful is cultural diplomacy in the real world? I would say that cultural diplomacy is strategically advantageous in two ways. First, soft power. And second, public diplomacy. First of all, if diplomacy is effective in the long-term perspective, a country needs to be armed with not only hard power, but also soft power. The reason why the United States has been able to maintain its leadership around the world in the post-war era is that its soft power was recognized in the world, in addition to its military and economic supremacy. Second, public diplomacy as well as government diplomacy matters because the public serves as a meaningful player in supporting policies related to specific countries. Since K-culture contributes to a pro-Korean sentiment in general rather than anti-Korean sentiment, it helps enhances public diplomacy.
Right. So culture, of course, is soft power too, and it's going to be a long game strategy that has a lot of influence, of course. Now, before we let you go, President Lee is also scheduled to attend the G20 summit in South Africa on November 22nd, and the summit will focus on solidarity, equality, and sustainability as well. Professor Connolly, what kind of role and messages could we actually expect from the South Korean president on that global stage?
Right. Well, I think President Lee will be quite happy because Presidents Xi and Trump are not there. Maybe a little more relaxing than his experience in the APEC summit, where he had to be undoubtedly very concerned about the meetings and what was going on. But more profoundly, I think the fact that the presidents of China and the United States are not there is an opportunity for South Korea to demonstrate some of this leadership. I've heard there are rumors that the United States during the working groups has been particularly intransigent, and there are some rumors that maybe a joint statement is going to be very difficult to arrive at all. In this kind of situation, I think it's a good chance for South Korea's delegates, President Lee himself, to demonstrate that he's willing to engage in multilateral diplomacy, that maybe he can help contribute to some sort of joint statement, or at least in trying to bridge the U.S. with the other sides. And specifically, I think the South African presidency, they have a task force on artificial intelligence, data governance, and innovation for sustainable development. I think this is particularly an issue that President Lee's domestic and international agenda really is congruent with. So if it is a very kind of hostile environment there, I think he can at least definitely contribute a lot to this much safer topic. And at the end of the day, I think it's a really sad reflection on the state of multilateralism in today's world, that simply by showing up and being cooperative, President Lee can score a win compared to the countries that aren't even there at the G20 this time.
Right, so it will definitely be a critical global platform, and let's hope for South Korea to, show some real leadership in that stage moving forward. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Connolly.
My pleasure.
And Professor Ban, of course, we really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.